In the United States, let's have this talk. So last week, while we was all looking at this submarine, the United States Supreme Court passed 3 rulings over Thursday and Friday that I think we all should be paying attention to. A 6-2 ruling to remove affirmative action from colleges and universities. A 6-3 ruling for businesses to refuse services to the LGBTQ community. And another 6-3 ruling to deny Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness program. So let's talk about the affirmative action. So Harvard and the University of North Carolina says that it violates the rights of the Equal Protection Clause in the Constitution to consider race in admissions. And the Supreme Court approved that a 6-2 vote that it's unconstitutional to consider a student's race in college admissions. Affirmative action was put in place for minorities to gain access to jobs in premier schools. People who did not have the inroads or the financials to qualify otherwise. Without affirmative action, things will go back to being segregated like they were before the 70s. But the effects of affirmative action not only hits the minority, but it hits the majorities too. At least at my Prairie View A&M University. There were a number of Caucasian people that attended my HBCU. Majority of them applied for Texas A&M but couldn't get in at the time. And because my school was part of the Texas A&M system, it was an easier way to feed them into the main campus. And not only received admissions, but they also received scholarships because they were the minority in the majority at my university. So let's move on to businesses discriminating against the LGBTQ community. An artist in Colorado denied services to a same-sex couple that wanted a website designed for their wedding. She said it went against her religious rights, in addition to her First Amendment free of speech clause. And the court ruled a 6-3 vote in her favor to deny services to the same-sex couple because it violated her First Amendment. The LGBTQ community is about to experience a fragment of what the civil rights movement was about. Businesses denying you service for the exposure of your sexual preference. This could go both ways, to the minimal or to the extreme. At a minimum, maturity will keep it at the infringement upon your religious rights, like the web designer did. An extreme of this is the LGBTQ community not having access to certain specialists or hospital care because of the religious belief of the person providing the care. And the extremes are all contingent upon the religious individual. And lastly, but certainly not least, let's talk about Uncle Joe's debt relief plan for the college kids. Now, JoJo told all these college kids prior to his election that he was going to get some of this student loan stuff forgiven. The Supreme Court came back and said, you ain't got no authority under the HEROES Act to dismiss over $430 billion worth of student loans. Denied him at a 6-3 vote. Y'all do know that Bernie Sanders was talking about his student loan forgiveness program back in 2016 at the Democratic convention when he was going against Hillary. His plan was to forgive some of the debt of this generation and tax Wall Street to get the money back. But for some wild reason, we just never brought that up again. When Biden brought up this student loan forgiveness plan, he ain't had no plan. He ain't had no earthly idea how this was going to get done. The average cost for a 4-year degree in the 1970s was less than $2,500, where the millennials are looking at an average of a $55,000 degree over a 4-year term. Their 4-year degree was less than one semester of a millennial's degree. And seeing as how the Gen Zs are not as interested in college as the previous generations were, they also don't want to work. Now, even though millennial, you have survived a housing market crash and a worldwide pandemic, we still need you to pay into this debt, which is astronomically higher than what your parents had to pay into. And because they don't want to work and the previous generations are getting older than retiring, millennials are left holding the bag. That means they need the last generation to pick up the financial slack of what the current generation's not doing, which means further dissolvement of the middle class. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting thinner. And y'all made all these jokes about Bernie Sanders' age. If he ever obtained office, he probably died there because he was so old. But Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are the same age. And speaking of character, Bernie Sanders has been fighting for civil rights and equality since the 60s. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is spitting out racial slurs since the 70s, including his infamous, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. And the Latinos are scared to get vaccinated because they think they're going to get deported. I guess that's just the American way, huh? I'm telling you all of this because if we don't do something about it, eventually we're going to vote Terry Crews as a president, start watering our plants with Gatorade, and wearing Crocs for shoes. We're already wearing Crocs for shoes. But I know a lot of millennials and Gen Zs don't watch the news. But it's good to be aware of what's going on in the world from time to time. This is why it's important for you to vote. This is why it's important for you to write your congressman. This is why it's important to voice your opinions and get people that agree with that opinion to fight for the very thing that you want. Because the injustice will continue to happen as long as you stay silent.